We're now going to dive into what's happening in the world of plant breeding from a U.S. perspective. And we're joined by two members of the LCS wheat breeding team. First up, we've got Dr. Marla Barnett, who is out of the Central Plains with LCS Seed. Marla, it is great to have you on the show.
Yeah, hi. Nice to be here.
And we're also joined by Dr. Dylan Larkin, who is out of the PNW, specifically Walla Walla, Washington. And so maybe we can get a couple wine reviews from Dr. Larkin as well. Dylan, it's great to chat with you.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
I guess we'll have to leave wheat, or so we'll have to leave wine for another discussion. Today we're going to focus on wheat. I guess, Dylan, to start off with you, from your perspective, what are some of the biggest challenges right now that wheat growers are facing in the U.S. that you're trying to solve for them through genetics?
Well, so I would say that, right now, some of the issues that growers are facing are a lot of uncertainties when it comes to, the environment and such. So dealing with situations like drought stress or freeze damage. So trying to basically develop varieties that can handle those changes so that farmers can expect more consistency out of their wheat variety. I would say that that's one of the things there.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. And Marla, how have the breeding priorities evolved in kind of the last decade to address some of these challenges that Dylan's talking about? Have they changed?
Well, by and large, kind of at a broad view, maybe not entirely that much change over the past 10 years, but locally, yes. I think Dylan and I both, work in very different parts of the United States, very different regions. And so he has a set of priorities that are slightly different, perhaps, than the priorities that I have down here in the Central Plains. And a good example of that might be grazing ability or grazing tolerance. So in the Southern Central Plains, winter wheat, especially, is planted and grazed throughout the winter by cattle. And that is a very different management style or management practice in the Southern Central Plains, where it really goes directly to profitability. And so the ability to get basically two crops off of 1 acre, you get your gain from your cattle, but then you also take those cattle off and get harvested wheat crop off of that. So you get two crops off of one field. So that directly goes to the profitability of the farmer. And so those breeding priorities can change very regionally, but by and large, over time, the last 10 years, I don't think we've seen that much change in priority.
Now, tools, though, that has evolved, right? Dylan,
Sure.
talk about some of the tools that you're using now.
Yeah, so there's a lot of really exciting tools that breeders have access to now versus even 10 years ago, it seems like. So we regularly use molecular markers and to help us make our selections. So basically you have something that's linked to a specific part of the DNA that can basically help you to identify, okay, this plant has this sort of resistance to, say, like stripe rust. So it helps breeders to make selections without even needing to see it in the field almost. We're also using technologies like genomic selection too, which can predict the performance of a variety without growing it as well, only at a much larger scale across the entire genome of a plant too. So there's a lot of really great tools out there that we're using, and a lot of things that are in the pipeline as well. So you've probably heard of gene editing and things of that such. But right now there's not really much of that happening in wheat, but in the future, I think that could be a possibility that we see.
Yeah, and when I hear you describe some of those tools, I think what comes to mind for a lot of the audience listening here is, okay, that's going to produce better varieties. And that is obviously the goal. But
sure,
Marla, as well, I think what we also should be hearing there is the speed at which you're able to deliver on that. Like, and if varieties are able to come to market faster because of breeding techniques, that's also lowering the cost of delivery to the market as well. So there's a benefit there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I've always kind of approached my job as a breeder that I can go into a field of, fixed lines and try to find, not necessarily try to find or select the best possible um, line that's in that trial, but I should be able as a breeder to find the worst and get rid of it. And really that is my job as a breeder, is to get rid of the worst and do that subsequently every time, every year. And with the tools that Dylan's mentioned, that only works to help us get rid of the worst each year, and even earlier than typically than what we have in the past.
Yeah. Dylan, you mentioned not a lot of gene editing happening in wheat yet. I just want to circle back to that. How come?
Well, I think, one of the main issues right now is like in the Pacific Northwest, for instance, 80% of the wheat that we grow in the PNW is exported to Japan, South Korea, Thailand, Philippines. So a huge export market there. And there right now in Japan and South Korea, for instance, there is a big reluctance for them to accept gene editing or gene edited or genetically modified wheat. And so, we as, in the PNW, we have to be very conscious of what they want in the seed, in the grain that they're buying. So if we release a genetically modified wheat variety, they will not want that in their food production system. So we have to be very conscious of that because they might reject a shipment of seed because if it is contaminated with something like that.
Yeah, and even if we've decided that gene editing actually isn't genetically modified, there could be a perception in some of those end use markets, and that's kind of what that's what the caution is around. Hoping it
Exactly.
changes into the future because, in this case, the U.S. farmer benefits if we're able to use all the tools in the breeder's toolbox for sure. But Marla, when you were talking about the priorities earlier, for a lot of growers, they're thinking, well, yield. And that's like yield really does, it gets you in the door, so to speak. But there's a whole package, a puzzle that has to be put together to make the best varieties have there's disease and there's characteristics, and wheat also has this quality thing that can be a factor depending on what wheat type. So it's a bit of a puzzle and a tough one for you to. You almost need like Google Maps to steer through that mess.
Well, I mean, you can look at it that way, but in the end, if you if you keep your your customer interests, basically what the farmer needs, if you keep that close to your chest, close to your heart, at the top of your mind, you're going to be okay. And really, that's all I do as a wheat breeder is I just try to develop commercial products that are going to have a fit and meet a demand and are going to help the farmer. So
do you kind of have two customers, Marla? Do you have like the farmer customers got to grow grow the variety, but then you're also thinking past that, where you're thinking about the miller, for example.
Sure.
Like it's so.
Sure, absolutely. In the Central Plains, we're a little bit different as far as exports that Dylan mentioned. We're about 50-50. So about 50% of the grain harvested in the Great Plains is used domestically, and about another 50% of it goes to the export market. Our export markets are a little different than the PNW region. The major importers of U.S. wheat are places like Mexico, some African countries, Thailand, Philippines. Some of those countries are big importers of U.S. wheat, but by and large, the quality parameters that we work with in the Central Plains is, we're hard red winter wheat, and that market class, for that price point, for the protein level, it should be able to make a loaf of bread. And so we definitely, have a wheat quality lab here at LCS. It's in Windsor, Colorado, and we work very closely with our colleagues that work in that quality lab, and we do a lot of analysis on lines pre-commercial to make sure that we maintain the quality of U.S. wheat and that all of the commercial products that we put out can make a loaf of bread.
Yeah. It's kind of what makes wheat different than corn, for example, right? Corn,
Yeah.
it's much more, sort of a straight path to what corn is used for, obviously from an ethanol or livestock feed perspective. Uh, but wheat's has a lot more markets and a lot different types and a lot more uses than a crop like corn, in comparison. So, what should farmers be paying attention to when thinking about wheat varieties in the future, from your perspective as a breeder? What do they need to make sure they're keeping in mind? And Dylan, we'll start with you.
Well, I would say that for one thing, they should really consider, what is their production environment? In the Pacific Northwest, it's a very diverse growing environment. There are many different like growing environments within this small region. So I would say that a farmer, that first of all, they want something that's going to be high yielding, of course, in their area. But they also should really consider, is this variety going to be well adapted to my area? So, like, say if you're, an irrigated or a farmer that grows primarily on irrigation, you probably don't want something that's going to be too tall or too late, for instance, like in the Columbia Basin. Whereas if you're a farmer up in the Northeast Washington or Palouse region, where you're seeing a lot more dry land production, you're seeing rainfall less than 16 inches a year, you probably want something that's going to be more drought tolerant and more cold tolerant as well. And you might want something that's going to be later maturing too. So, just be conscious of, what your production system is, and that not every wheat variety is going to do the best at your location too. So I would suggest, really paying attention to like what the state variety trials are showing, in terms of data. That's very helpful, listening to your agronomists and extension experts too, to find the best fit for your area.
Yeah, well put. There's definitely, just the difference between Washington State, Montana to Colorado, for example, never mind covering the rest of the country. Marla, how about for you? What are some things that come to mind for you?
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind is kind of just overall profitability. And with that, comes, a lot of different things, management, and of course, yield. So that's kind of what I would first look at, is just kind of the overall general profitability on how I want to manage my wheat crop. By and large, at least in the Central Plains, wheat is a low input crop compared to, other crops or other alternatives. And so the ability to yield and have a stable yield across many different years and many different environments, I really prioritize that. I also, when looking at varieties, try to recommend that farmers plant of different range and maturities. I'm often quoted as saying, in winter wheat in the Central Plains, I can't tell you when it's going to rain, but I can tell you it's going to matter. And a lot of times yield trials in winter wheat aren't so much a pure yield trial, but they're just a precipitation lottery. And what I mean by that is, if you can have your variety mature and catch a rain when it was the most needed for that variety's, lifespan, there's a good chance you're going to win the yield trial, just if you catch the rain at the right time. So related to that, it's always a good recommendation to have a different range in maturities on your farm.
For many of us that live in drier areas, we very much identify with that weather lottery. Indeed.
Yeah.
Hey, let's wrap up thinking about the future and sort of use our imaginations here. What are some of the things that, as plant breeders in the crop of wheat, that you're excited about, what potentially could happen into the future? Like, Marla, let's start with you.
Yeah. So I'm excited, looking towards to the future. I think hopefully maybe in the next 5 to 10 years. I do think that some of our competitors within the wheat breeding community at large, I think some of our competitors are going to develop and release hybrids, and if they have a need or fix a problem and are higher yielding and can deliver that seed in an economic way, absolutely, let's do it. Also, I think genetic modification is also on the horizon as well. And again, for the Central Plains, if we can have a benefit and grow wheat with less water, again, the same amount of yields with less inputs, and if it solves the problem, I'm all for it if it meets a need for the farmer. So I'm excited about the future in those two respects.
Yeah, those are good ones. Dylan, how about you?
Well, I would say that, much like what Marla was saying, there's a lot of cool new technologies and opportunities out there to help the farmer. But for me, what really excites me the most is being able to combine these new technologies like biotech, or using drone imaging in the field to help make selections, or using genomic selection, using all these things to get a better product out to the farmer quicker. I think that's what really excites me, so that we can better adapt to the changes in our environment and the crop production system, so that, say if a new disease comes along, the breeder can react quicker and release a product that can meet those challenges to help the farmer sooner rather than later, so that it can minimize the impact of that disease, things like that. So I think, just combining all these cool technologies to really just create a better product that can help the farmer in the end.
Yeah, love it. This has been really awesome. Really, very much appreciate the conversation, talking about where wheat breeding is today and where it could potentially go in the future. Thinking about it from the customer's perspective, this has been a fabulous discussion. Really appreciate you joining us here today, Dr. Marla Barnett. All the best to you.
Yeah, thanks.
As well, hey, Dylan, it was great to meet you. It's Dr. Dylan Larkin out of the PNW with LCSC. Dylan, thanks a lot for joining us here today.
Thank you so much.